It's so important to realize that you can make all of these fancy notes, you can make all of these beautiful mind maps and flashcards, but at the end of the day, in the exam, you're not going to have any of this. So now let's talk about the 3 active revision strategies that got me all A stars and all 9s in my GCSEs and A levels. And now, the most effective way to revise for your exams is you're spending hours and hours revising, highlighting, writing notes. You barely have time to rest at the end of the day, but you're still not getting the grades that you want. Are you actively revising, or are you fooled by the illusion of revision? You put your head down to do work, but is this work actually benefiting you? If your main sources of revision include the following, then you're doing it all wrong. If you're highlighting, if you're rewriting, if you're rereading, this is just so passive and it's not going to help you in the long run. Let me tell you what will. So guys, before we get into the video, be sure to give this video a big thumbs up, comment and subscribe, as well as share it, as it really helps with the YouTube algorithm. Let's get straight into it. So now let's talk about something called the forgetting curve. You may have heard of it before, but as you guys know, memory is fickle. It fades really easily. You can know something like the back of your hand one day and then forget it the next. It's honestly really annoying. But why does this happen? It's basically due to something called forgetting and the forgetting curve. The forgetting curve is a theory made by Herman Ebbing, which basically shows us that we forget the information that we have been taught over time. As you guys can see, the steepest part of this graph is at the start. So this means that if you do not revise something after you've learned it, you're more likely to forget it in the end. So your memory will slowly start to decline until you can't recall anything at all. How do we avoid being a victim of the forgetting curve? How can we retain all of the information that we've spent so much time learning? Active revision and spaced repetition is the answer to all of these problems, and I'm sure you've heard of it before, but do you know if you're revising correctly? Do you know if you're revising actively in order to maximize your results when spending minimum amount of time studying? So now a lot of these words in productivity, such as spaced repetition, such as active recall, can honestly just seem like a bunch of words and not really any substance to it. So I'm going to be thoroughly explaining how I would implement this in order to improve my productivity in studying. So let's talk about active revision. Studying is based on the retrieval and the recall of information that you have learned in your classes. Active revision is basically based on testing yourself in the same way that you will be in the exam and strengthening those pathways which will need to be used in the exam. It's so important to realize that you can make all of these fancy notes, you can make all of these beautiful mind maps and flashcards, but at the end of the day, in the exam, you're not going to have any of this, and your result will solely be determined by what you currently have in your brain at that time. So this means that all of your revision should be active and not passive, so that you can get all of this information into your brain. There's no point of highlighting and rewriting and rereading a passage but none of it entering your brain. It's just a waste of time. This means that when you're revising, you should feel some kind of struggle or some kind of work that your brain is being put through in order to show that you are actively revising. Think of it as training a muscle. You have to feel some kind of sensation to prove that you're doing it correctly. Obviously, it shouldn't be too uncomfortable. At the same time, there should be an element of difficulty to it in order to show that you are studying correctly. You can gamify revision by making it fun, making it something that you would want to do. So you can play revision games with your friends, you can try different study methods, which I'm going to be explaining in this video, and you should also implement rewards for studying. This video is kindly sponsored by Seneca. If you guys haven't heard of Seneca, then get to know it. Especially if you're a GCSE student, this is the website for you. Are you tired of the same old boring revision methods? Are you tired of rereading, of highlighting your notes, of repeating the same thing over and over, day in and day out? Then you need to try Seneca. Seneca is a way that makes your revision fun, but also effective. It mixes things up and allows you to have a break away from standard and conventional revision methods. I personally loved using Seneca in the run-up to my GCSEs. I found it as a nice break away from stressful revision sessions and something different to mix things up a little bit, because if you don't learn how to mix things up, it gets really hard to actually memorize things. And what you want to do is always change your revision method, and Seneca is the best way to do this. Seneca has recently released these new features which I believe will help a lot of you. My favorite feature has to be the mini mock, where you basically get to create your own mini assessment. You can choose to select the hardest questions, choose whether you want calculated questions or not, and you can also ask it to test you on your weaknesses. So it will test you on the parts where you lose the most marks, and I find this really helpful in order for you to improve your grades. As well as this, you can also use Seneca to learn some content, and it's just a really nice way to learn. It's a really interactive, in-depth way of revising for your GCSEs, and there's so many courses. Like, it has almost every single course that there is, so honestly, be sure to check it out. Seneca is free for all students, so what are you guys waiting for? Be sure to sign up using the link in my description. Don't miss out. So let's get back to the video. So now let's talk about the 3 active revision strategies that got me all A stars and all 9s in my GCSEs and A levels. So my personal favorite are flashcards. So as you guys know from my videos, you guys know I love a good flashcard. These are really helpful when they're used correctly. correctly. And that point is really, really important, when they are used correctly. I see a lot of people making flashcards, and when I was in year 11, I saw people making flashcards and I was thinking, is it really helpful? Because when you are just rewriting your notes and putting them on a flashcard, there's no way you're going to memorize it. And that time that you spent rewriting your notes is honestly just a waste of time, and that time could be spent on something much more useful in the long run. So what I would recommend is that you base your questions off the specification. You put a question on the front and an answer on the back, and ideally the answer should be something that is exam worthy, something that you would get full marks for if you wrote it in the exam. Initially it takes quite a bit of effort and time to make these flashcards, but if you make them correctly and if you make them effectively to target your weak points, it will save you a lot more time in the long run, as opposed to having to make flashcards in exam season or just before exam season and being stressed out. So try to make your flashcards throughout the study period, throughout the whole year, so that when you come to your revision right before exam season, you are already ready to revise. And the most important thing is that you should use these frequently to avoid the forgetting curve. As you guys see, after you learn something, your memory of it rapidly declines. In order to prevent this from declining, you want to be recalling this information at frequent intervals so that you can always be at the top of this forgetting curve, and by the time it is your exam, you are more likely to be able to recall it if it was asked in a question. So something you can do is make something called a retrospective timetable. This is basically different from your standard revision timetable, as it forces you to revise things at certain intervals. This will basically prevent you from forgetting things and being a victim of the forgetting curve. For example, let's say I find a topic such as ecology hard. I'll review it one day and then I'll review it the next day, and then after 1 week, I will still go back to that topic. You're just constantly going back at the topic, slowly increasing the intervals that you review the topic. And let's say I find something easier, I'll have larger intervals. For example, cell biology, I'm confident in it. So my first interval would be 1 week, then it could be 1 month, and so on. I also have a video on how to make effective flashcards, so be sure to check that one out because I go into much more detail than I do in this video. Another method that I highly recommend in order to get great grades in your exam is blurting. So now I'm sure you've heard of blurting, but if you haven't, it's basically the active retrieval of information by writing every single thing you know about a topic onto a plain sheet of paper. And this basically highlights your weaknesses because you see what you currently do know and what you don't know. After a set amount of time, you should get another pen and you should write in the parts that you didn't remember by using your notes or by using the revision guide, and then you can also highlight these weaknesses into flashcards if you find that you're frequently forgetting this information. This is helpful especially for essay-based subjects because these subjects do not prompt you about the points that you should make in your essays. They just give you an overall topic and expect you to recall all of the information that you know about that topic. So blurting in this way stimulates those pathways in the exam which are going to be tested, and also helps you to find prompts and topics for your paragraphs, so ultimately you can write the essay quicker and spend a lot less time thinking about what you want to write. And this tip will basically make your essays 100 times better. And now the most effective way to revise for your exams is through exam questions. As I'm sure you guys know, exam questions are the closest things to what you'll be getting in your exam. A lot of subjects these days are based solely on your exams, not coursework, so your exam should be the focus of majority of your revision. Ideally, these should be done in exam conditions, so this means they should be timed, it should be quiet, and you should have no distractions. So obviously this is really hard to implement in your everyday home. If you can't replicate these conditions, that is not the end of the world, but the more you do this, the more you'll be prepared for the exam conditions and the exam hall, because if you aren't already, it can get really stressful when you experience that. So not only do exam questions prepare you physically by getting you used to the exam conditions, but they also prepare you academically because it does something called increasing your exposure to these questions. The more your exposure is to these questions, the more likely you are to be able to answer them in the exam. As you guys know, if you go through exam papers over the years, you'll see that questions come up all the time and they just phrase them in slightly different ways. So the more you revise these papers, the more likely these questions are going to come up in your exam, and the more you're going to be quick and to the point and get the marks in those questions. You also get used to the mark scheme, so every exam board have different mark schemes and have different ways they want you to write your answers. So the more that you see these mark schemes, the more you can memorize these and write them the way they would want it in the exam. So do your work gradually throughout the year, avoid cramming, and just try to spread things out so that you avoid this stress before your exam. Now finally, let's talk about nourishing your body and how this nourishes your mind. So as you guys know, your brain needs food to work effectively and efficiently. If you don't eat properly, if you don't nourish your body, if you don't drink water, are, your body is not going to like this, and your brain is not going to like this either. Your brain uses 320 calories alone just to think. Like, just think about it. Your brain is amazing and it needs all of the energy that it can get. In exam season or mock season, it can be really hard to have a balanced diet and to look after yourself, but this will not help you in the long run. You'll have less energy, less focus, and do worse in your exams. So eat well, sleep well, and drink enough water. This means that you'll be able to study for longer periods, feel good, and you'll also just have a better mood overall. Exam season is as hard as it is. You don't want to make it worse for yourself. And sleeping is also incredibly important for memory retention. If you don't sleep, you'll find that when you wake up, you forgot everything you revised the night before, and this is really annoying. And this is basically because you didn't give your brain and your body enough time to recover. So sleep well, guys, and just try to have at least 7 hours of sleep. I know that sounds really hard, and sometimes I don't even follow my own advice, but it really does help. So guys, we've reached the end of this video. I hope you found it useful, and if you did, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, as well as share this video with someone else. And since you're watching this video, you're probably wanting to increase your productivity and your motivation, so be sure to watch my video on how to start studying after you've wasted half the day. And hopefully this helps you to stay productive, especially after a day of procrastination. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.